Hi there. Welcome to Hushed History Channel. Tonight, we're going to slip into the marble halls of ancient Rome, where the most powerful men in the world are losing their minds in spectacular fashion. You're about to witness emperors who made their horses senators, force their guests to watch them sing terrible songs for hours, and turn the Colosseum into their personal aquarium. Fair warning. After hearing what these rulers considered normal Tuesday activities, you might never complain about your boss again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below, whether you're in bed in Bangkok or dozing off in Denver. We're all about to take the same strange journey together. All right, let's begin the story. You find yourself standing in the Roman Forum in 37 AD, and the crowd around you is buzzing with a mixture of excitement and terror. The new Emperor Caligula has just announced his latest decree, and even by Roman standards, it's completely insane. Your sandals scrape against the ancient stones as you push forward to hear better, though part of you wishes you hadn't. The emperor has appointed his favorite horse, Incitatus, to the position of consul, the herald announces, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. You blink, certain you've misheard, but no, the man repeats it, and now adds that the horse will be given a marble stable, an ivory manger, and purple blankets. Purple. You think numbly, the color reserved for emperors. The thing is, this isn't even the weirdest thing Caligula has done this week. Just yesterday, you watched him order his soldiers to collect seashells on the beach, declaring them spoils of war from his conquest of Neptune. The god of the sea, apparently, had been thoroughly defeated by a few thousand confused legionaries with buckets. You shuffle past the Temple of Vesta, where rumors swirl that Caligula has been forcing senators' wives to work in a brothel he's established in the palace. The specific details vary depending on who's whispering, but everyone agrees on one point. Refusing the emperor's invitations leads to mysterious disappearances. Modern historians still argue whether these were actual brothels or elaborate humiliation rituals designed to break the aristocracy's power. But frankly, you're not sure which option is worse. Your friend Marcus catches your elbow. "Did you hear about the bridge?" he mutters. You haven't, so he explains. Caligula has ordered a floating bridge built across the Bay of Naples, 3.5 miles of ships lashed together, just so he can ride across it in the armor of Alexander the Great. The cost could feed Rome for a year, but the emperor wants to prove a soothsayer wrong who once said he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Gulf of Baiae. The smell of garum, that fermented fish sauce Romans pour on everything, wafts from a nearby food stall, making your stomach turn. Or maybe it's not the sauce. Maybe it's the knowledge that just this morning, Caligula had several spectators thrown to the wild beasts in the arena because he'd run out of criminals and the show must go on. The mainstream historical record confirms he once ordered an entire section of crowd thrown to the animals simply because he was bored. You duck into a side street, trying to avoid the emperor's German bodyguards who patrol the city looking for anyone who might be speaking ill of their master. The irony isn't lost on you. These barbarian warriors are the only ones Caligula trusts, probably because they don't fully understand Latin when he's ranting about being a living god. Fast forward a few years, and you're somehow still alive in Rome, though Caligula isn't. He was assassinated in 41 AD by his own Praetorian Guard, who apparently decided that when your emperor starts demanding people worship his statue and threatens to move the capital to Egypt so he can be worshipped as a living pharaoh, It's time for a career change. But if you thought things would improve, you're in for a disappointment. The year is now 64 AD, and Emperor Nero has just premiered his latest musical composition. You're sitting in a locked theatre, yes, locked, because Nero has ordered the doors barred until his performance ends, and your bladder is about to explode. The Emperor has been singing for 4 hours straight, and the acoustics in here are unfortunately excellent. No one is allowed to leave during the Emperor's performance, a guard had announced at the beginning. You've heard stories of pregnant women giving birth in the stands, and men pretending to die just to be carried out. One senator allegedly jumped from the upper gallery and broke his leg, rather than endure another verse of Nero's Ode to Troy's Burning Towers. The Emperor struts across the stage in a tragic actor's mask, his voice warbling through another verse about flames and destiny. Rather fitting, considering half of Rome burned down last week. While the mainstream narrative says Nero was in Antium when the fire started, plenty of Romans whisper that he set it himself to clear land for his massive new palace, the Domus Aurea. Historians still debate whether he actually fiddled while Rome burned. The fiddle hadn't been invented yet, for one thing, but he definitely performed his songs about Troy's destruction while his capital smouldered. Your neighbor, an elderly merchant, has developed an ingenious strategy. He's learned to sleep with his eyes open. You're desperately trying to master this skill when Nero hits a particularly shrill note. The Emperor fancies himself a revolutionary artist, the kind of misunderstood genius who's simply too advanced for his primitive audience. He's abolished the traditional Roman values of military virtue and stoic dignity, replacing them with compulsory appreciation for his artistic vision. The twisted thing is, Nero genuinely believes he's blessing you with his talent. When he competed in the Olympic Games, he fell out of his chariot during the race but was still declared the winner. Every competition he enters, he wins. It's almost like there's some correlation between being emperor and never losing. But surely that's just coincidence. As Nero launches into his finale, something about cosmic harmony and his divine voice bringing order to chaos. You reflect on how this man spent the equivalent of millions of dollars on a rotating dining room in his palace. The ceiling has ivory panels that slide open to shower guests with flowers and perfume. Last week, several dinner guests nearly suffocated under a particularly enthusiastic avalanche of rose petals. They're calling it death by decor. The Emperor's caterwauling finally ends, and you stumble out of the theatre into the Roman twilight, your legs numb from sitting and your ears ringing from Nero's divine artistry. You barely make it to the nearest public latrine before your bladder surrenders. As you relieve yourself alongside a dozen other desperate theatre-goers, you can't help but think, at least here, the bodily functions are happening where they're supposed to. Fast forward a few centuries, and you're standing in a drafty castle hall in medieval France, watching King Louis VI, they call him Louis the Fat, conduct the morning's royal business. Except he's not sitting on a throne. He's perched on an ornate wooden chair with a convenient hole cut in the seat, and below it, well, you can hear exactly what's below it. The smell hits you like a mace to the face. The Duke of Normandy's envoy approaches, announces a herald, and you watch in horrified fascination as a well-dressed diplomat is forced to kneel before the king while His Majesty continues his bowel movement. This isn't some power play or humiliation tactic. This is simply Tuesday. The throne room has taken on a very literal meaning in medieval Europe. You see, medieval kings have decided that since they rule by divine right, everything they do must be divine, including defecation. The king's excrement is royal excrement, and being allowed to witness its production is supposedly an honor. You're not buying it, but you're also not about to tell Louis the Fat that his ideas stink. Well, everything stinks here, but his ideas especially. The French aren't even the worst offenders. You've heard tales from the English court where the groom of the stool, yes, that's an actual job title, is one of the most coveted positions in the kingdom. This lucky gentleman gets to wipe the royal bottom and engage in intimate conversation with the king during his most vulnerable moments. Mainstream historians confirm this position existed from the Tudor period well into the 17th century, and these men often became the king's most trusted advisors. Nothing bonds two men quite like one of them handling the other's used toilet paper. Apparently, you shift uncomfortably as the Duke's envoy delivers his message, trying not to gag as the king grunts his way through both diplomacy and digestion. The envoy is proposing a marriage alliance, discussing dowries and land transfers, all while pretending he can't hear the royal splashing sounds echoing from beneath the throne. Medieval court etiquette demands everyone act as if this is perfectly normal. "We shall consider your lord's proposal," Louis declares, then pauses mid-sentence to strain audibly. The princess's dowry must include the contested borderlands of Splash, Vexin, later. You're wandering through the castle trying to find somewhere to relieve yourself that isn't directly onto the rush-covered floor. You've learned that those sweet-smelling herbs scattered everywhere aren't just for decoration. They're desperately trying to mask the fact that everyone from servants to nobles regularly relieves themselves in corners, stairwells, and behind tapestries. At Hampton Court in England, King Henry VII has installed what he calls the Great House of Easement, a massive communal toilet that seats 28 people at once. You've used it, and it's essentially a giant bench with holes over a river. Privacy is for peasants, apparently. The aristocrats sit side by side, discussing politics and gossiping while their noble buttocks hang over the Thames. One courtier jokes that more treaties are negotiated on the Great House of Easement than in the actual council chambers. The situation in medieval castles has gotten so bad that many nobles simply relieve themselves wherever the urge strikes. You've personally witnessed the Earl of Warwick pause mid-conversation to urinate against a priceless tapestry depicting the Battle of Hastings. When you looked shocked, he laughed and said, "What? It's already covered in French blood." You're called to witness a peculiar ceremony in the Holy Roman Empire, where Emperor Frederick III is holding court. The emperor suffers from chronic constipation, a fact everyone knows because medieval medicine involves publicly discussing every royal bodily function in excruciating detail. Today, the court physician is administering an enema while the emperor continues to hear petitions. The physician explains to the assembled courtiers that the royal blockage is affecting the entire realm, as the emperor's body is mystically connected to the body politic. If the emperor can't defecate, symbolically, neither can the empire prosper. Historians still argue whether medieval rulers genuinely believed in this cosmic connection between their bowels and their kingdom's well-being, or if they just enjoyed making everyone suffer alongside them. The answer, you suspect, is a bit of both. The strangest part of all this is the chamber pot hierarchy. Not all pots are created equal. Oh no, royal chamber pots are made of silver or gold, decorated with gems and coat of arms. You've seen nobles literally fight over who gets to use which pot, as if the container for their waste somehow elevates the waste itself. The Duke of Burgundy famously travels with a set of 12 matching chamber pots, each one designated for a different time of day, He claims his bowel movements follow the celestial spheres. In Spain, you encounter perhaps the most bizarre development. King Ferdinand has created the position of royal stool reader. This learned man examines the king's excrement daily, checking its color, consistency, and smell to divine the future of the realm. Today, he's declared that the king's morning movement shows signs of victory against the Moors, with undertones of a good harvest. You're not sure what victory-predicting poop looks like, but everyone nods sagely. The Turkish ambassadors visiting the French court are quietly appalled. In the Ottoman Empire, such matters are handled with discreet water closets and actual hygiene. One ambassador writes home that European nobles are barbarous in their sanitation, yet they call us heathens. He's not wrong. You've noticed that the Turks smell of rosewater and soap, while the French nobility smell of, well, exactly what you'd expect from people who think bathing weakens the constitution. As you prepare to leave this era of aggressive toilet diplomacy, you pass through a German castle where they've installed what they proudly call modern conveniences, essentially just holes in the castle walls that empty directly onto the heads of anyone unfortunate enough to walk below. The castle's defensive strategy literally involves dumping human waste on attackers. The engineer explains this serves a dual purpose: humiliation and biological warfare. Medieval innovation at its finest. You stumble out of a medieval guardrobe, that's what they call those toilet holes in castle walls, and somehow find yourself transported to Tudor England in the year 1540. The smell hasn't improved much, but now it's mixed with the aroma of roasting meats, and lots of them. You're in Hampton Court Palace, and King Henry VIII is about to have breakfast. Breakfast is a laughable understatement. You watch slack-jawed as servants parade an endless procession of dishes past your table in the Great Hall. The king hasn't arrived yet, but already there's enough food to feed your entire village for a week. Roasted swans stuffed with goose, stuffed with chicken, stuffed with lark. Yes, really. Massive pies filled with live birds that fly out when cut open. And something called cockenthrice, the front half of a pig sewn to the back half of a capon. It looks like something from a fevered nightmare, which, considering Henry's eating habits, it basically is. The king finally enters, and you have to stop yourself from gasping. Henry VIII is substantial. His doublet could serve as a tent for 3 men. He moves with the careful waddle of someone whose joints are screaming under the weight of what historians estimate was over 400 pounds. He collapses into a specially reinforced chair. You heard the carpenter had to rebuild it twice after previous versions splintered under the royal posterior, and immediately begins destroying a platter of lamb chops. You're seated far enough away to avoid flying grease, but close enough to witness the spectacular demolition. Henry consumes food like he consumes wives, voraciously, messily, and with increasingly desperate hunger. His typical daily intake includes 13 dishes per meal, washed down with a gallon of ale and a bottle of sweet wine. The royal accounts, those mainstream historical documents that survive, record him spending the equivalent of $6 million per year on food alone. More capons, Henry bellows through a mouthful of something unidentifiable. And where's my suckling pig? The physicians hover nearby, wringing their hands. They've tried to tell him that his leg ulcers, massive, stinking wounds that refuse to heal, might improve if he ate less. The last physician who suggested this too forcefully was sent to the tower. Now they just mix mercury into his wine and hope for the best. You watch Henry tear into a marchpane sculpture. That's marzipan shaped like his own palace, literally eating an edible version of Hampton Court while sitting inside actual Hampton Court. The metaphor is so heavy-handed it could crush a horse, unlike his poor horse, which can barely carry him anymore. He has to be winched onto his mount using a special crane the royal engineers designed. They call it a mounting block, but everyone knows it's basically a construction crane repurposed for royal rumps. The smell from the king's leg wounds mixes with the food aromas in a combination that makes your breakfast, a single piece of bread, threaten to revisit. Courtiers have started carrying pomanders filled with spices and perfumes, pressing them to their noses whenever they get within 10 feet of His Majesty. The ladies of the court have perfected the art of breathing through their mouths while maintaining pleasant smiles. Between courses, and there are always more courses, Henry regales the court with tales of his virility. 6 wives, he booms, spraying the Duke of Norfolk with particles of venison, and I could handle 6 more. The court laughs nervously. Everyone knows his current wife, Catherine Howard, is roughly the same age as the lamb he's devouring, and probably regards him with about the same enthusiasm. The king's appetite extends beyond food and women to, well, everything. He collects tapestries like playing cards, owns over 2,000 pieces of gold plate, and has 55 palaces. When he travels between them, it takes 300 carts to carry his belongings. You've heard servants joke that they move house so often because it's easier than cleaning up after His Majesty's visits. Give a palace 2 weeks of Henry, and it needs 6 months to air out. His most grotesque consumption, though, is his devouring of the church. Not content with having 6 wives, Henry has consumed the entire English Catholic establishment, dissolving monasteries and swallowing their wealth. He's literally eating gold-leafed communion wafers from chalices that once held the blood of Christ, melted down and reforged into his dinner service. The irony of a glutton founding a new church so he can get divorced isn't lost on anyone, but pointing it out tends to result in a shortness of height, about a head's worth of shortness. Historians still debate whether Henry's transformation from athletic prince to monstrous glutton was caused by his 1536 jousting accident, or simply genetics catching up with him. But watching him now, gnawing on what appears to be an entire roasted peacock, feathers reattached for presentation, you think the answer is simpler. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely everything, including your appetite control. "Bring me my breakfast wine," Henry commands. It's 9 a.m. The breakfast wine is a sweet malmsey that would knock out a horse. Henry drinks it like water, which explains why his face has the ruddy complexion of a badly painted sunset. The court physician mutters something about the king's great heat of stomach requiring cooling liquids, which is medieval medicine speak for he's an alcoholic, but we can't say that. You notice the king's fool, Will Summers, making crude gestures behind Henry's back. He's the only one who can mock the king and survive, mainly because Henry finds flatulence jokes hilarious. Summers once reportedly told Henry, "You've got the stomach of a king and the appetite of his entire court." Henry laughed so hard he vomited, then immediately called for more pie. The feast continues for 3 more hours. 3 hours for breakfast. You watch Henry consume enough calories to sustain a labouring peasant for a week, then belch magnificently and declare himself a bit peckish. The entire court must pretend this is reasonable. The Duke of Suffolk leans over and whispers, "Lunch is in 2 hours. Pace yourself." You're not sure if he's joking or offering genuine survival advice. As the king is finally helped, hauled from his chair, you realize something horrifying. This is just breakfast. There's still dinner to come, the main meal, where Henry really lets loose. You've heard tales of dinner lasting 6 hours, with entertainment between each of the 20 courses. Jugglers, musicians, and dancers perform while the king methodically decimates entire farms' worth of livestock. The most perverted part isn't even the gluttony, it's the waste. While Henry gorges himself on exotic delicacies, London's poor are starving. The scraps from a single royal meal could feed 100 families, but instead they're thrown to the king's numerous dogs, who are themselves too fat to properly walk. It's like watching someone build a monument to excess out of other people's hunger. The remains of Henry's breakfast are still being cleared, a process that involves actual wheelbarrows, when you find yourself whisked forward in time to 1682. You're standing in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, and the splendor is absolutely blinding. Every surface gleams with gold. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors, and the mirrors reflect infinite versions of aristocrats in silk and lace. It's the most beautiful place you've ever seen. It's also the most disgusting. The smell hits you like a perfumed fist. Beneath the heavy clouds of rose and lavender, there's something else, something organic, something that makes you understand why everyone here carries scented handkerchiefs and why the ladies' fans never stop fluttering. You're in the palace of Louis the Sun King, and his court of 10,000 nobles who apparently never learned basic toilet training. You edge along the magnificent gallery, trying not to slip on the marble floors that are suspiciously slick in places. A duchess rustles past in enormous skirts, and you catch a whiff of something that definitely isn't French perfume. You've heard the stories, but experiencing it firsthand is something else entirely. These people, the most sophisticated, educated, and wealthy individuals in Europe, regularly relieve themselves behind curtains, in stairwells, and sometimes right in the middle of corridors. Pardonnez-moi, a duke murmurs, stepping behind a priceless tapestry. You hear the telltale sound of liquid hitting stone and hurry away. This is Versailles, where the palace has over 700 rooms, but not a single toilet. Well, that's not entirely true. There are a few chaises percées, chairs with holes, scattered about. But with thousands of courtiers and servants, the math doesn't work in anyone's favor. You stumble upon a group of ladies in the Queen's apartments, their elaborate dresses spread around them like toxic flowers. One suddenly stands, walks 3 steps to a corner, squats slightly, and nip. You turn away, but the sound is unmistakable. She returns to the conversation without missing a beat, discussing the latest court scandal while her urine pools on the priceless parquet floor. A servant will clean it eventually. Maybe. The mainstream historical record confirms that Versailles had a serious human waste problem. The palace's own records mention hiring teams of servants whose sole job was to clean excrement from the corridors each morning. Historians still argue whether this was due to poor planning or deliberate power play. After all, if you can make a duke defecate in a corner like an animal, you've established pretty clear dominance. You're summoned to attend the king's lever, his morning rising ceremony. This should be an honor, except you're crammed into the royal bedchamber with 100 other nobles, all pressed together in the summer heat. The windows are sealed shut because Louis believes fresh air causes disease. The combination of unwashed bodies, heavy perfume, and the underlying scent of human waste creates a miasma that makes your eyes water. Louis himself emerges from behind his bed curtains, and even from across the room. You can smell him. The Sun King, who supposedly takes baths twice a year, whether he needs them or not, believes that linen absorbs impurities from the body. He changes his shirt 3 times a day and considers himself remarkably clean. His physicians have convinced him that bathing opens the pores to disease. So instead, he's rubbed down with spirits and doused in cologne. He smells like a distillery that's been used as a latrine. His Majesty will now perform the Grand Defecation, announces a courtier, and your heart sinks. Of course, even the Sun King's bowel movements are a public spectacle. A special chair is brought forward, jewel-encrusted, naturally, and the most powerful man in Europe proceeds to void his royal bowels while discussing tax policy with his finance minister. The fact that this is considered the height of civilization makes you question everything. You escape to the gardens, hoping for fresh air. But even here the situation is dire. Behind every manicured hedge, aristocrats are doing their business. The orange trees in their silver planters are lovely, but you've learned not to look too closely at the soil. One courtier explains that the gardens are actually worse than the palace, at least inside. There's a chance someone will clean up. Out here, noble waste becomes noble fertilizer. The fountain shows are spectacular, with water shooting hundreds of feet into the air. But you can't help thinking that all this hydraulic engineering could have been used for, actual plumbing. But no, Louis has decided that fountains are more important than toilets. Priorities. At dinner, a public spectacle where hundreds watch the royal family eat, you notice something odd. Despite consuming massive quantities of rich food, Louis rarely leaves the table. Then you spot it. A discreet servant sliding something under the tablecloth. Sweet Jesus. He's using a chamber pot while eating, while hundreds of people watch him eat. The servant whisks it away with practiced efficiency, but the damage to your appetite is permanent. The Prince de Condé is telling a story about visiting the palace last winter. The corridors were actually better, he laughs. Everything was frozen solid. You could walk without slipping. Everyone chuckles politely, but you see the hollow look in their eyes. These people have normalized living in their own filth because leaving Versailles means losing access to power. You witness the ultimate perversion of palace life when a countess gives birth during a court ball. She can't leave. That would be showing weakness. So she delivers the baby right there in the Hall of Mirrors, behind a hastily arranged screen of fans held by other ladies. The orchestra doesn't even pause. The baby's first breath is of air thick with perfume, sweat, and the accumulated waste of 5,000 aristocrats. Welcome to Versailles, little one. The Turkish ambassador writes home that French nobles live like animals in their own filth, yet mock our customs. He's installed a proper Turkish toilet in his quarters, with running water and everything, and the French treat it like a curiosity. They prefer their bejeweled chamber pots and public defecation to basic sanitation. It's a choice that baffles him and, frankly, you. As night falls, you discover the final indignity. The palace is so packed that nobles sleep anywhere they can find space. Corridors, antechambers, even under staircases. And since no one's getting up to find a chamber pot in the dark, well, you spend the night propped against a wall, trying not to think about what you're standing in or why your shoes squelch with every step. By morning, you understand why French perfumers are the best in the world. They have to be. You escape Versailles at dawn, your shoes permanently ruined, and your faith in aristocracy thoroughly shattered. The year shifts to 1698, and you're shivering on the docks of a half-frozen Moscow river, watching workers unload enormous barrels of vodka. Not wine, not ale, vodka. Hundreds of barrels, maybe thousands, all destined for the Kremlin, where Peter the Great, Russia's towering madman of a Tsar, has decided that sobriety is for weaklings and Westerners. You're dragged, literally dragged, to the palace by two of Peter's jolly company. His drinking companions who patrol Moscow looking for anyone foolish enough to be sober after sunset. They dump you in a vast hall where the smell of alcohol could knock out a horse. This is the infamous, all-joking, all-drunken synod of fools and jesters. Peter's personal drinking club, where refusing a toast is considered treason. Peter himself towers over everyone at nearly 7 feet tall, his face already flushed with drink despite it being barely noon. He spots you immediately, new faces always catch his attention, and bellows something in Russian. A translator leans close. His Majesty says you look dangerously sober. This is a medical emergency requiring immediate treatment. Before you can protest, a massive cup is thrust into your hands. It's not a cup. Actually, it's a bowl, the kind you'd use for soup, filled to the brim with clear liquid that makes your eyes water from 3 feet away. The cup of the Great Eagle, someone whispers. 1.5 liters. Drink it all, or His Majesty will be offended. You take a sip and immediately understand why Russians call it little water. It goes down like liquid fire. Peter watches expectantly, his own bowl already empty, reaching for his second or fifth. With Peter, who can tell? The man's liver must be made of iron. Soviet historians like to downplay his drinking, but the diplomatic records are clear. Peter the Great consumed roughly 2 bottles of vodka daily, not counting wine, beer, and whatever experimental spirits his court alchemists concocted. "Faster!" Peter roars, and you glimpse the contradiction that defines him. This is the same man modernizing Russia, building a new capital from scratch, creating a navy from nothing. He's a genius who speaks multiple languages, understands shipbuilding and artillery, and can perform surgery. He's also a violent alcoholic who once beat his own son to death and thinks forcing people to drink until they vomit blood is hilarious. You manage half the bowl before your stomach rebels. Peter laughs, a sound like bears fighting, and claps you on the back so hard you spray vodka across a priceless Persian rug. He drinks like a German, he declares. This is apparently an insult. Germans, in Peter's view, are lightweights who dilute their wine with water and go to bed before dawn like reasonable human beings. The party has rules, if you can call them that. Everyone must drink whatever Peter drinks, in the same quantity. Leaving before Peter passes out is punishable by more drinking. Vomiting is acceptable, encouraged even, but you must continue drinking afterward. The official court records, kept by increasingly drunk scribes, document competitions where nobles consume the equivalent of a gallon of pure alcohol in a single sitting. You watch Prince Menshikov, Peter's closest friend and drinking companion, casually down his 7th bowl while negotiating military reforms. This is how Russia is governed, through an alcoholic haze that would kill normal men. The prince has developed the ability to remain functional while consuming quantities of alcohol that would embalm a corpse. It's either evolution or magic. "Bring the goblet of the great penance," Peter commands, and the room goes quiet. Even these hardened drinkers look nervous. Servants struggle to carry in what can only be described as a small barrel with handles. It holds 2 gallons. 2 gallons of vodka. The victim, honoree, is a Swedish diplomat who made the mistake of arriving sober to negotiate prisoner exchanges. The Swede tries diplomacy. "Your Majesty, in Stockholm we have a saying. In Moscow we have a saying too." Peter interrupts. "Drink or swim." This makes no sense until you remember Moscow is built on a river, and Peter has absolutely thrown people in for refusing toasts. In January, the Swede drinks. The mainstream historical accounts confirm Peter's drinking wasn't just personal, it was policy. He established the Drunken Synod as an official state institution, complete with ranks, ceremonies, and mandatory attendance. The Prince Pope of the Synod wore robes decorated with vodka bottles instead of crosses. They held services that were just competitive drinking contests disguised as religious ceremonies. Historians still debate whether this was satirizing the church or just Peter's idea of fun. Probably both. You stumble through the palace, desperately seeking air that doesn't reek of alcohol and vomit. In one room, you find Peter's collection of curiosities, pickled fetuses, deformed animals, and the preserved heads of executed rebels floating in vodka. Even the museum exhibits are alcoholic. A servant explains that Peter believes vodka preserves everything: bodies, heads, and Mother Russia herself. The parties last for days, not hours, days. You sleep in shifts on benches sticky with spilled drinks and substances you don't want to identify. Peter has installed special gutters in the floor to channel away the vomit. He calls them Liberty Streams, and they flow constantly. The palace has the world's most advanced drainage system, designed specifically to handle the output of a permanently drunk government. On the third day, or is it the fourth, Peter announces naval maneuvers. This doesn't mean the party ends. Oh no, it means the party moves to boats. You're herded onto a barge loaded with more vodka than navigational equipment, where Peter insists on teaching everyone to tie sailors' knots while barely able to stand. 2 admirals fall overboard. They're fished out and given more vodka to warm up. The foreign ambassadors have developed strategies. The English envoy has a lead-line stomach, or possibly just no sense of self-preservation. The French ambassador brings a body double for the really serious drinking sessions. The Austrian keeps a physician hidden behind a curtain with emergency stomach pumps. You've seen him use it twice already today. Peter's drinking games are particularly sadistic. There's Cardinal, where missing a toast means drinking a penalty bowl for each cardinal direction. There's Noah's Ark, where you must drink once for every animal on the ark. Peter's version includes mythical beasts, so prepare for at least 100 toasts. There's the dreaded multiplication, where each round doubles the previous amount. It's mathematically designed to kill you. You witness Peter's idea of a practical joke. He's filled a courtier's boots with vodka and demands he drink them dry before putting them on. The man actually does it. His feet will probably need amputation, but refusing the Tsar's humor is worse than frostbite. Another time. Peter forces newlyweds to consummate their marriage in a bedroom made entirely of ice. After drinking enough vodka, to survive the experience. As your week in this alcoholic asylum ends, you're somehow still alive, though your liver is composing its resignation letter. Peter passes out mid-sentence while explaining his plans to make vodka the official state currency. His courtiers carefully position him on his throne and continue the party around his unconscious form. The government of Russia literally doesn't stop for alcohol poisoning. You crawl out of Peter's palace on hands and knees, your liver begging for asylum in any country that's heard of water. The world spins, shifts, and when it finally stops, you're standing in the Bavarian Alps in 1869. The air is crisp, clean, and mercifully alcohol-free. Before you rises a sight that makes you question whether the vodka has finally driven you mad. A fairy tale castle perched impossibly on a mountain crag, its white towers piercing the clouds like something torn from a children's book. This is Neuschwanstein, and somewhere inside, King Ludwig II of Bavaria is probably talking to his furniture. You climb the winding path to the castle, past construction workers who exchange knowing looks. He was up all night again, one mutters, riding his mechanical peacock around the throne room. You assume this is a euphemism until you actually enter the castle and see it. A life-sized artificial peacock that spreads its tail and cries when you turn a hidden crank. It costs more than most Bavarians see in a lifetime. A servant guides you through rooms that defy description. Every surface is carved, painted, or gilded with scenes from Wagner's operas. The bedroom alone took 14 woodcarvers 4 years to complete. You're looking at a bed that cost the equivalent of $1 million, and its owner barely sleeps in it because he's reversed his entire schedule, sleeping all day, living all night, like the world's most expensive vampire. His Majesty will receive you in the Venus Grotto, the servant announces, which sounds like another euphemism, but isn't. You're led outside and down into what appears to be a natural cave, except it's not natural at all. Ludwig has built an artificial grotto complete with a lake, a shell-shaped boat, and coloured electric lights. In 1869, when most of Europe still uses candles, the whole thing can be heated to tropical temperatures, and hidden machines create artificial waves and rainbows. Ludwig floats into view on his golden boat, dressed as Lohengrin, Wagner's Swan Knight. He's heartbreakingly handsome in that inbred royal way, with the kind of bone structure that comes from centuries of cousins marrying. He's also completely, utterly detached from reality. "Welcome to Venusberg," he calls out. "Have you come from the realm of mortals?" You mumble something diplomatic. Ludwig doesn't seem to hear anyway. He's already launching into a monologue about how he's not really a king, but a reincarnation of Louis XIV, sent to Earth to preserve absolute monarchy through the power of interior decorating. His boat bumps against the artificial shore, and you notice it's shaped like a swan, because of course it is. The mainstream historical consensus is that Ludwig was eccentric, but not insane. At least not initially. But watching him conduct an entire conversation with an imaginary Wagner, the real one stopped visiting years ago after Ludwig's affections became too intense. You're not so sure. He gestures at empty air, laughs at unheard jokes, and occasionally shushes you so he can hear what Ghost Wagner is saying about the acoustic properties of artificial caves. "I'm building a new castle," Ludwig announces. "Falkenstein. It will make Neuschwanstein look like a peasant's cottage. The throne room will be larger than most cathedrals, and I'm installing a flying machine to travel between towers." His finance minister, you've heard, weeps openly during budget meetings. Bavaria is going bankrupt funding. Ludwig's architectural fever dreams. But try explaining fiscal responsibility to a man who just spent the education budget on a golden sleigh shaped like a peacock. You're invited to dinner, which means entering Ludwig's nocturnal world properly. The dining room table is set for 12, but you and Ludwig are the only real people here. The other places are for his guests, Louis XIV, Marie Antoinette, and various French courtiers who've been dead for a century. Ludwig converses with them throughout the meal, passing dishes to empty chairs and toasting the health of the departed Bourbon dynasty. The food itself is French, of course. Everything in Ludwig's world is French. He speaks French to his German servants, insists on French court etiquette from the 1700s, and has painted "L'État, c'est moi" on his bedroom ceiling. Historians debate whether this was political philosophy or mental illness. Watching him bow to an empty chair and apologize to Marie Antoinette for the soup being cold, You're leaning toward the latter. Tell me, Ludwig says suddenly, fixing you with eyes that are both beautiful and utterly vacant. Do you think swans can talk? Mine do, but only to me. They tell me secrets about the future. Would you like to meet them? Before you can answer, you're bundled into a sleigh. Yes, the peacock one, and racing through the Bavarian night toward one of Ludwig's other castles. He owns dozens, each more elaborate than the last. This one, Linderhof, has a dining table that descends through the floor, so Ludwig never has to see servants. He can't stand looking at common people, so he's designed castles where he can live entirely alone except for his imaginary friends and talking swans. The Swan Lake is real, stocked with dozens of the birds that Ludwig feeds personally while dressed as the Swan Knight. He introduces each one by name, then waits expectantly for them to respond. When they just paddle around doing swan things, he translates their conversation for you. Elsa says the moon is especially beautiful tonight. She's always been the poetic one. You spend the rest of the night watching Ludwig perform scenes from various operas for an audience of waterfowl. He's actually a decent singer, which makes it worse somehow. Here's a man with genuine artistic talent, unlimited resources, and he's using both to serenade birds at 3 a.m. while his kingdom collapses. The tragedy of Ludwig is that his fantasies are genuinely beautiful. Every castle is a masterwork, every room a jewel box. He's created some of the most stunning architecture in Europe, but he's done it by bankrupting his nation and retreating so far into fantasy that he makes Peter the Great's drunken synod look like a reasonable government policy. At least drunk Russians were still engaging with reality, even if they could barely see it. By dawn, Ludwig is showing you his latest project, a flying machine designed to carry him between his castle towers. It's based on Wagner's Valkyries and looks like a swan crossed with a peacock crossed with an explosion in a gilt factory. The engineer he's hired looks suicidal. It needs to support His Majesty's weight plus a full orchestra. The man explains. He wants to recreate the ride of the Valkyries, literally. As you leave Bavaria, you learn that government ministers are already discussing having Ludwig declared insane. Within 20 years, he'll be dead under mysterious circumstances, drowned in waist-deep water along with the psychiatrist who declared him mad. Historians still argue whether it was suicide, murder, or just the inevitable result of living in a fantasy world where swans talk and Wagner's ghosts design your furniture. You leave Ludwig's fairy tale madness behind and find yourself in the considerably less whimsical setting of Constantinople. 1648. The Topkapi Palace spreads before you like a small city, its courtyards and pavilions housing the Ottoman Empire's beating heart. Somewhere in this labyrinth of luxury, Sultan Ibrahim VI, known to history as Ibrahim the Mad, is about to commit an act so horrific that even hardened Ottoman historians would struggle to document it. You're smuggled into the palace by a trembling eunuch who keeps muttering prayers under his breath. Tonight, he whispers, stay silent, stay hidden, and whatever you do, don't go near the water. The Bosphorus glitters in the moonlight, beautiful and terrible. You're about to learn why. The harem quarters are in chaos. Hundreds of women, the most beautiful in the empire, collected from across 3 continents, huddle in groups, whispering frantically. Some are crying. Others sit in stunned silence, clutching jewelry or letters from home. The air thrums with the kind of tension that comes before catastrophe. He's gone completely mad this time, a Georgian concubine tells you, her voice barely audible. Last week, he had 300 sable furs laid out in the throne room and made love to each one, convinced they were transformed princesses. Now he says we've been conspiring with his mother, all of us, every single woman in the harem. You've heard about Ibrahim's peculiarities, his obsession with obese women. He once sent out a decree ordering all fat women in the empire to be brought to him. His belief that he could smell treason, his habit of feeding coins to fish in the palace fountains, while his empire starved. But this feels different. This feels final. The mainstream historical record confirms what happens next, though the exact numbers vary. Ibrahim, in a fit of paranoid rage, orders his entire harem, somewhere between 280 and 300 women, sewn into weighted sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus. These aren't nameless victims. They're daughters of nobles, gifts from foreign princes, women who've spent years in the palace, some mothers to his children, all condemned because one of his concubines smiled at a male cat, which Ibrahim interpreted as adultery. You watch from a hidden alcove as the guards arrive. These are the deaf mutes, the Sultan's special executioners who can neither hear pleas nor speak of what they've done. They move with terrible efficiency, grabbing women who scatter like panicked birds. Some fight, most seem too shocked to resist. A Circassian girl who arrived just last week keeps asking what she did wrong. No one has the heart to tell her, nothing. The procession to the water is a nightmare made real. Hundreds of women, some barely teenagers, others who've lived in the palace for decades, all marching to their deaths because their master has decided that female conspiracy lurks in every corner. Ibrahim watches from a palace balcony, occasionally shouting accusations at the moon, which he believes is sending him messages through the reflections on the water. "My son's wet nurse is down there," the eunuch beside you whispers, tears streaming down his face. "She raised 5 princes. She speaks 4 languages. She knows the Quran by heart. And now she'll die because the Sultan thinks his coffee tasted strange this morning." The drownings take hours. The Bosphorus, that legendary waterway between Europe and Asia, becomes a mass grave. Historians still debate whether one woman survived by swimming to shore, or if that's just a legend born from the need to believe something human could emerge from such inhuman cruelty. The fish in the strait, locals say, refused to be caught for months afterward. Back in the palace, Ibrahim celebrates his victory over feminine conspiracy by ordering every mirror in the harem smashed. He's convinced the women were using them to signal ships in the harbour. He then demands his mother bring him new concubines immediately, the same mother he just accused of orchestrating treachery. The cognitive dissonance would be funny if 300 women weren't currently at the bottom of the sea. You learn that Ibrahim's madness has deep roots. Locked in a cage for most of his youth by his brother Murad IV, who executed their other brothers, Ibrahim emerged to rule an empire with the social skills of a traumatized hermit. His solution to every problem is excess. Feeling unloved, acquire more women, feeling poor, spend the treasury on fur coats for horses, feeling paranoid, drown everyone who might theoretically betray you. He once had a cow dressed in precious jewels and made a pasha. A court chronicler tells you, showing you the official records. The cow pasha had its own seal and servants. When foreign ambassadors complained, Ibrahim had them watch while he consulted the cow about matters of state. The cow's moos were interpreted as policy decisions. The irony is that Ibrahim's mother, Kösem Sultan, is actually conspiring against him, not with the harem, but with the janissaries and government ministers who've watched their empire collapse under a madman's rule. Within days of the mass drowning, she's organizing his deposition. The man who killed hundreds of women over imagined conspiracies will be overthrown by the one woman he trusted. You're present for Ibrahim's final days of power. He's built a new pleasure pavilion covered entirely in amber and fur. He has a thing about textures, where he lies naked on piles of sable, while advisors try to explain that the empire is bankrupt. Sell Mecca, he suggests. When told that's impossible, he orders the construction of an artificial Mecca in the palace gardens. We'll charge pilgrims admission. The end comes quickly. Janissaries storm the palace, and Ibrahim barricades himself in his fur room, screaming that the drowned women have returned as vengeful spirits. He's not entirely wrong. Their deaths have turned even loyalists against him. The empire that tolerated sultans who murdered brothers and enslaved thousands draws the line at wholesale drowning of the harem. Ibrahim is strangled with a silk bowstring, the traditional Ottoman method for deposing sultans. As life leaves him, he reportedly whispers about seeing beautiful women in the water, calling him to join them. The executioner later claims Ibrahim died smiling, finally reunited with his victims. More likely, oxygen deprivation causes involuntary muscle contractions. But the Ottoman Empire needs its ghost stories, especially after creating so many ghosts. The new sultan, Ibrahim's 7-year-old son, Mehmed IV, orders the harem rebuilt and restocked within months. It's as if the mass drowning never happened, except for the Ottoman women who still won't eat fish from the Bosphorus, and the diving boys who claim that on still nights, you can hear singing from beneath the water. 300 voices, they say, calling for justice that will never come. The ghostly singing of drowned concubines fades as you're pulled backward in time to 1462, landing in the southern reaches of Wallachia. The acrid smell of smoke and something worse, much worse, fills your nostrils. You're on a hill overlooking Targovishte, and spread before you is a sight that will haunt humanity's collective nightmares for centuries. 20,000 Turkish prisoners impaled on wooden stakes, arranged like a forest of the damned. Welcome to dinner with Vlad III Dracula, Prince of Wallachia, the man who turned human suffering into performance art. You're part of a Florentine diplomatic mission, though right now you'd rather be anywhere else, including back in Ibrahim's drowning chambers. At least that horror was over quickly. Here, some of these men have been dying for days, sliding slowly down greased poles that entered their bodies at carefully calculated angles to avoid vital organs. Vlad knows exactly how to keep a man alive on a stake for up to 48 hours. He considers it a science. His Highness invites you to dine. A boyar announces, and your stomach turns. You already know where this is going. Vlad's favorite joke, if you can call it that, is forcing guests to eat while surrounded by the impaled. He finds their reluctance amusing. The boyar leads you through the forest of stakes, where men moan in Turkish, Romanian, Bulgarian, and languages you don't recognize. Pain, apparently, is universal. The dining table is set in the exact center of this nightmare garden. Fine silver plates, Venetian glass, silk tablecloths, all surrounded by thousands of dying men. Vlad sits at the head, a surprisingly small man with intense green eyes and a mustache that would be fashionable if it weren't flecked with blood. He's eating already, tearing into roasted lamb with genuine appetite. "Welcome, friends from Florence," he says in perfect Italian. Because of course he speaks multiple languages, monsters are rarely stupid. "Please, sit. The meat is excellent today. The fear in the air gives it a special seasoning." You force yourself into a chair, trying not to look at the man impaled just 10 feet away. He's still alive, eyes tracking your movement. Vlad notices your discomfort and smiles. That one betrayed his own unit to save his life. I saved it for him. In a way, he'll live another day at least. Isn't mercy wonderful? The mainstream historical record confirms Vlad's forest of the impaled, though numbers vary from 20,000 to 30,000. What's often missed is the psychology behind it. This isn't random brutality. It's calculated terror as statecraft. Vlad rules a tiny principality caught between the Ottoman Empire and Hungary. His solution? Be so horrifyingly cruel that even empires think twice before invading. You know what I love about impalement? Vlad asks, conversationally. Spearing a piece of meat that looks disturbingly like... No, it's just lamb. Probably. It's democratic, prince or peasant, Turkish general or common thief. Everyone slides down the same pole at the same speed. Gravity plays no favorites. A servant approaches with wine, stumbles over a root, and spills a few drops on the tablecloth. The entire dinner party freezes. Vlad looks at the stain, then at the servant, then back at the stain. How clumsy, he says softly. 2 guards appear from nowhere. Minutes later, there's a new steak going up, and a new scream joining the chorus. Vlad resumes eating as if nothing happened. Where was I? Ah yes, democracy. He gestures with his knife at the surrounding horror. You see that one there? The one on the golden steak. That's a Turkish envoy who refused to remove his turban in my presence. Said it was against his custom. So I helped him follow his custom permanently, nailed the turban to his skull before the impalement. Cultural sensitivity is so important. You manage to choke down some bread while Vlad regales you with impalement statistics. He's keeping records, because of course he is. 40,000 in his 6-year reign so far. He's particularly proud of a technique he calls the family tree, impaling entire families on stakes of graduating heights. Children at the bottom, parents above. It keeps them together in death, he explains. I'm very pro-family. The Italian ambassador tries diplomacy. Your Highness, Florence wishes to establish trade. Trade, Vlad laughs. A sound like ravens fighting. Yes, let's discuss trade. I once caught some merchants cheating on weights. Do you know what I did? Impaled them, obviously. But first I made them eat their own gold coins. One by one. The steak went in easier after that. The gold weighted them down. Physics and justice, perfectly combined. Historians still debate whether Vlad's cruelty was madness or method. Watching him dip his bread in a pool of blood beneath one of the steaks. Animal blood, he assures you. Though his smile suggests otherwise, you think it's both. He's using rational means to achieve irrational ends, turning his entire principality into a psychology experiment in terror. The Turks call me Kazakhlebey. Vlad mentions, seeming pleased. The Impaler Prince. They say I learned these techniques as their hostage in my youth. Partially true, but they only taught me the basics. I innovated. I made it art. Look at that pattern there. Do you see? Fibonacci sequence. Mathematics in murder. A dying man nearby gasps something in Romanian. Vlad translates helpfully. He's begging for water. He's been begging for 2 days. Sometimes I have the guards give them honey water. It keeps them alive longer. But not him. He's a boyar who questioned my tax policies. Critics get no honey. You notice Vlad never turns his back on anyone, even his own guards. His chair is positioned to see every approach. He tastes everything before eating it properly. For all his power, he lives in constant paranoia. Then again, When you solve every problem with impalement, you create a lot of potential avengers. Tell me about Florence, Vlad says suddenly. Do you have impalements there? We have hangings, Your Highness, and the wheel, sometimes. He snorts dismissively. Hangings are over in minutes. The wheel, perhaps a few hours. Where's the artistry? Where's the time for contemplation? A properly impaled man has days to consider his crimes. It's educational for everyone. The sun sets, turning the sky blood red, and servants light torches throughout the forest of stakes. The flames cast dancing shadows that make the impaled seem to writhe even more. Vlad insists on dessert, honeyed fruits that taste like ash in your mouth, while explaining his architectural plans. I'm building a new capital, he says. Bucharest. The central square will accommodate 5,000 stakes. Amphitheatre-style seating so citizens can watch the slow deaths while conducting business. Efficiency and entertainment combined. As the evening ends, Vlad offers a toast. To understanding between nations, he says, raising his cup. May Florence know that Wallachia stands ready for friendship, and may your merchants always use honest weights. The threat is as subtle as a stake through the gut. You're escorted back through the dying forest, past men who've become living anatomy lessons. At the edge, you pass a small stake with a child who couldn't be more than 10. Even your hardened guard looks away. He stole an apple, the boyar explains quietly. The prince believes in starting moral education young. You stumble away from Vlad's grotesque dinner party, grateful to leave medieval Wallachia behind, only to find yourself in the equally disturbing palace of Vincennes, near Paris, in the year 1422. But this time, the horror isn't what the king does to others. It's what his own mind does to him. You're in the court of Charles VI of France, and the palace servants are wrapping every piece of furniture in layers of cloth because their monarch believes he's made of glass. Quietly now, a chamberlain whispers, leading you through corridors where every footstep is muffled by thick carpets. His Majesty had another episode this morning. He heard a door slam and was convinced he'd shattered. We spent 3 hours assuring him all his pieces were still together. You enter the royal chambers to find a strange sight. King Charles VI of France, wearing clothes reinforced with iron rods to prevent breakage, sitting absolutely still in a chair surrounded by cushions. He doesn't turn his head. That might cause cracks. But his eyes track your movement with the paranoid intensity of a man who thinks the universe is conspiring to break him. Approach slowly, Charles whispers. No sudden movements. The vibrations, you understand. I'm very fragile today. This is the same man who once ruled the most powerful kingdom in Europe. Now he spends his days terrified that he'll shatter like a wine glass. The royal physicians huddle in the corner, arguing in Latin about whether this is an excess of melancholic humours or demonic possession. The fact that they're having this debate in 1422 and not 1022 shows how little medieval medicine has advanced. Your Majesty, you begin carefully, but Charles holds up a trembling hand. Softly, your voice creates sound waves that strike my surface. I can feel the microscopic fractures forming already. He touches his face gingerly, checking for cracks that exist only in his fractured mind. Do you know what it's like, being glass? Every moment is terror. Every breath risks shattering from within. The mainstream historical record calls this glass delusion, and Charles is its most famous sufferer. But watching him flinch when a bird flies past the window, convinced its shadow could break him, you realize the clinical term doesn't capture the full horror of living inside this particular madness. A servant enters with the king's lunch, moving with the exaggerated care of someone defusing a bomb. The plates are made of soft bread instead of ceramic. Charles banned all hard surfaces from his presence after convincing himself that proximity to other rigid materials might cause sympathetic shattering. He eats with wooden spoons wrapped in silk, cutting his meat with knives so padded they barely function. "Tell me," Charles says suddenly, "what news from the war?" You hesitate. France is losing badly to England. Orleans is under siege, and half the kingdom thinks Charles's son is illegitimate. But how do you explain military defeats to a man who thinks he's a champagne flute? The situation remains challenging, Your Majesty. Charles nods sagely. Yes, I imagine warfare is difficult when you're made of meat and bone, so crude, so durable. You can't imagine the refinement of being crystalline. Every thought must be gentle, lest it crack my skull from within. The irony is devastating. France needs strong leadership, and instead they have a king who won't leave his cushioned chair. The English are conquering territory, while Charles spends royal resources padding every surface in the palace. His own brother was assassinated in the streets of Paris, and Charles's response was to ban bells throughout the city because their ringing might shatter him. Your Majesty, a doctor ventures, perhaps if we examined you, we could assure you of your structural integrity. Charles recoils so violently he almost falls off his chair, then freezes. Terrified the sudden movement has caused internal damage. No touching. Are you mad? Do you know what pressure can do to glass? I'd explode into 1,000 pieces. They'd be finding shards of me for centuries. Historians still argue about what caused Charles's condition. Some blame the incident in 1392 when he flew into a rage and killed 4 of his own knights, thinking they were enemies. Others point to possible schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, but watching him exist in constant terror of his own fragility, you think the cause matters less than the effect. A king so paralyzed by imaginary vulnerability that he's created real catastrophe. You're summoned to witness what the court calls the king's exercise. This consists of Charles being carried, not walking, never walking. The impacts might crack his feet, to a specially prepared room, where he lies on silk cushions while servants wave feathers to create air circulation. Glass needs proper atmosphere, he explains. Too still and we grow brittle. Too much wind and we resonate to destruction. The Queen, Isabeau of Bavaria, hasn't shared his bed in years, partly because of his madness, but mostly because Charles believes the physical act might shatter him like a champagne bottle under pressure. He's convinced his penis is made of the finest Venetian crystal. The dynasty is dying out because the king thinks orgasms are structurally unsound. I wasn't always glass, Charles confides during a lucid moment. I remember being flesh, heavy, crude flesh. Then one morning I woke up transformed, refined, perfected, but so terribly fragile. Do you know I can see through my own hands sometimes, when the light is right? He holds up perfectly normal, flesh and blood hands, staring through them at something only he can see. The courtiers play along, complimenting the clarity of his glass, the fine quality of his transparency. What else can they do? Disagreeing with the king's delusions tends to trigger violent episodes where he forgets he's supposed to be fragile. The most heartbreaking part is the children. Charles's son, the future Charles VII, visits weekly. You watch the prince, maybe 12 years old, carefully approach his father, speaking in whispers, pretending to see the glass his father insists he's made of. You look very clear today, father, very strong glass, Not a crack anywhere. Charles beams with pride. Good eyes, my boy. I had myself polished yesterday, very carefully, with silk and morning dew. One must maintain oneself. As your visit ends, you witness the nightly ritual. Servants construct an elaborate cocoon around the king's bed, layers of cushions, silk, and soft wool to prevent any possible impact during sleep. Charles is laid in the center like the world's most fragile relic. He's developed a way of sleeping without moving, convinced that dreams might cause him to thrash and shatter. Good night, Your Majesty. The Chamberlain whispers, may you wake intact. God willing, Charles replies, though sometimes I wonder if shattering might be a relief, to finally stop fearing it. But no, I must remain whole. France needs me. France needs him whole, but not the way he thinks. They need him mentally whole, physically capable, emotionally present. Instead, they have a king so obsessed with imaginary fragility that he's become actually useless, a glass figurine in a position that demands steel. The English win victory after victory, while Charles sits motionless, afraid to govern lest the effort crack him. It's the perfect metaphor for a dying medieval order, a system so rigid, so crystallized in its thinking, that it shatters at first contact with change. Charles thinks he's made of glass, but really, his entire world is. The fragile world of glass King Charles dissolves, and you find yourself in considerably warmer climes. Cairo, 1951. The Abdeen Palace glitters with a different kind of madness, where King Farouk of Egypt, the last of his line, has turned kleptomania into a royal prerogative. You're attending a state dinner, checking your pockets every few minutes because the King of Egypt has a habit of stealing from his own guests. Whatever you do, warns the British ambassador's wife, don't wear anything valuable, and for God's sake, keep your hands on your wallet. You think she's joking until you watch Farouk work the room. He's enormous. Over 300 pounds of royal flesh squeezed into a white uniform dripping with stolen medals. Oh yes, stolen. Half the decorations on his chest belong to other people. He collects them like a magpie, lifting them right off diplomats and dignitaries too polite to accuse a king of theft. Ah, our American friend, Farouk booms, approaching with surprising grace for such a large man. His hands move constantly as he talks, gesturing wildly, patting shoulders, adjusting his medals. Only later do you realize your wristwatch is gone. The King of Egypt, ruler of the Nile, keeper of a 1,000-year dynasty, has just picked your pocket. The Egyptian courtiers pretend not to notice. They've developed a whole protocol around the royal thievery. There's actually a palace office dedicated to quietly returning stolen items, usually with a note suggesting the object accidentally fell into His Majesty's pocket. The fiction must be maintained. Admitting the king is a compulsive thief would mean admitting Egypt is ruled by a criminal. You're seated at dinner next to a French duchess who clutches her necklace nervously. Last year, she whispers, he stole my grandmother's brooch right off my dress while I was wearing it during the soup course. I felt his fingers, but what could I say? Excuse me, Your Majesty. Please stop robbing me. Farouk holds court at the head of the table, telling stories about his collection. And what a collection it is. The palace contains rooms full of stolen goods. Winston Churchill's pocket watch, lifted during a wartime conference. A ceremonial sword belonging to the Shah of Iran, disappeared during a state visit. Hundreds of stolen passports. Wallets, cigarette cases, lighters, pens, cufflinks, tie pins, and even dental fixtures. Yes, dental fixtures. He once stole a diplomat's gold tooth while it was still in the man's mouth. The procedure required considerable dexterity and chloroform. "I am a collector of experiences," Farouk announces, raising a glass of champagne with one hand, while the other hand is definitely doing something under the table to the Syrian ambassador's pocket. Every object tells a story. For instance, this ring. He displays a massive ruby. Belonged to a Maharaja who swore he'd never take it off. He was wrong. The mainstream historical record confirms Farouk's kleptomania was pathological. He couldn't help himself. He'd steal worthless items as readily as treasures, safety pins, shoelaces, half-eaten sandwiches. His pockets were always full of other people's property. Palace servants were tasked with emptying them each night, cataloguing the day's haul like archaeologists sifting through the remains of daily life. "Your Majesty," ventures an Italian countess, "I heard you have the world's largest collection of walking sticks." Farouk's eyes light up. 8,000. "Would you like to see them?" He doesn't wait for an answer, leading the entire dinner party to a vast hall filled with canes, walking sticks, and umbrellas. "This one belonged to Napoleon, this one to Ataturk, this one," he chuckles, "to a London banker who chased me 3 blocks trying to get it back." You notice servants discreetly returning items to guests as they examine the collection. Your watch reappears in your pocket. The Duchess's brooch is quietly pinned back on her dress. It's like watching a reverse heist, undoing the king's compulsions in real time. The Syrian ambassador gets his wallet back. Though the cash is gone, Farouk also collects currencies. Apparently. The tragic comedy deepens when Farouk shows off his pornography collection, the world's largest, naturally. Thousands of photographs, films, and artifacts that would make a brothel madam blush. He discusses it with the same enthusiasm he brings to stolen watches, completely oblivious to the discomfort of his guests. This one is from the Tang dynasty, very rare. The Chinese were so inventive. My analysts say the king suffers from compulsive collecting disorder. The CIA station chief mutters to you later, smoking a cigarette outside. Everything must be acquired, catalogued, possessed, women, food, objects. It's all the same to him. He's trying to own the world one stolen item at a time. You witness Farouk's stealing technique firsthand when he demonstrates a magic trick for visiting school children. He makes coins disappear from their pockets and reappear in his own. The children are delighted. Their teachers, who recognize pickpocketing when they see it, are horrified. The coins never reappear. Farouk is literally stealing candy from babies, or at least their pocket money. The revolution is already brewing in Egypt, and Farouk seems determined to stock up on stolen goods before his inevitable exile. He attends a funeral, yes, a funeral, and manages to lift jewelry from mourners paying their respects. He steals from his own ministers during cabinet meetings. He once pickpocketed his own prime minister while appointing him to office. The symbolism was probably lost on him. "You know what I find fascinating?" Farouk says during a late-night poker game where he cheats flagrantly. "People think stealing is about wanting things, but it's not. It's about the moment of taking. That instant when something transfers from their possession to mine. It's better than sex." He pauses. "Well, almost." Historians still debate whether Farouk's kleptomania was psychological compensation for losing his kingdom or the reason he lost it. Watching him rifle through the pockets of a sleeping guard, giggling like a schoolboy as he finds loose change, you think it's both. He's a king who acts like a common thief because deep down, he knows that's all he really is, a thief who inherited a throne. The evening ends with Farouk's party trick. He has the lights dimmed and challenges guests to keep hold of their valuables in the dark. It's pitched as a game, but everyone knows it's really an opportunity for the royal pickpocket to work without witnesses. When the lights come back on, the French ambassador is missing his glass eye. Even Farouk seems impressed with himself on that one. How? The ambassador demands, more amazed than angry. Farouk grins and produces the eye with a magician's flourish. Practice, my dear fellow. Lots and lots of practice. As you leave the palace, you're stopped by a servant who returns your wallet. When did he take that? Your pen. You didn't even know it was gone. And oddly, someone else's shoe. The servant shrugs. His Majesty's aim is not always accurate in the dark. Within a year, Farouk will be overthrown, fleeing Egypt with 16 pieces of luggage that customs officials will find stuffed with stolen goods from his own palace. He dies in exile in Rome, collapsing in a restaurant after consuming a massive meal. The waiter finds the king's pockets full of stolen silverware from the table, even dying. He couldn't stop taking things that weren't his. You leave Farouk's palace with your belongings, mostly intact, and find yourself transported to Copenhagen in 1769. The Christiansborg Palace should be a place of royal dignity, but instead, you're witnessing something that makes Farouk's pickpocketing seem quaint. King Christian VII of Denmark is in the middle of a council meeting, and he's enthusiastically masturbating while his ministers discuss tax reform. The Crown proposes a 2% increase on grain imports. Drones the finance minister, desperately maintaining eye contact with his ledger, while his monarch pleasures himself in full view of the Danish government. Christian doesn't even try to hide it. He's sprawled in his throne, royal robes in disarray, working away with the determination of someone trying to set a record. The other ministers pretend to study their documents with intense concentration. You can see one diplomat's paper is upside down, but he's not about to adjust it and risk making eye contact with the royal exhibition. Brilliant. Yes, the tax. More. Christian gasps. And nobody's quite sure if he's responding to the financial proposal or his own ministrations. Probably both. The king has a talent for multitasking, if you can call this talent. A visiting Prussian ambassador leans close to whisper, "Is this normal?" "Define normal," mutters a Danish courtier. "Last week he did it during a baptism. The priest just kept pouring holy water and pretending nothing was happening. What else can you do?" The mainstream historical record tends to sanitize Christian VII's behavior, referring delicately to his mental instability and inappropriate conduct. But you're watching him reach completion just as the Minister of War begins discussing fortification budgets, and there's nothing delicate about it. The king shudders, sighs with satisfaction, then immediately begins again. It's his third session this meeting. "Your Majesty," the Prime Minister ventures carefully, "perhaps you'd like to retire to your chambers." Christian laughs, a high, manic giggle that makes everyone flinch. "Why, I'm exactly where I want to be. Continue with the reports. And somebody open a window. It's getting rather warm in here." You're beginning to understand why Queen Caroline Matilda has taken up with the royal physician, Johann Struensee. Hard to maintain marital relations with a man who treats every public gathering as an opportunity for self-gratification. The poor queen is barely 18, shipped from England to marry this Danish disaster, and her husband is more interested in himself than in producing heirs. The meeting continues with Christian providing a grotesque rhythm section. Ministers speak faster, trying to conclude business before the next royal climax. The Minister of Justice is halfway through proposing judicial reforms when Christian suddenly stands, walks to the window, and continues his activities while waving at confused pedestrians below. He's greeting his people, the foreign minister says weakly, very connected to his subjects. Historians still argue whether Christian was schizophrenic, manic-depressive, or just catastrophically oversexed. But watching him blow kisses to horrified Copenhageners with one hand while the other remains busy, you think the specific diagnosis matters less than the result. Denmark is being ruled by a man who treats his penis like a stress ball. You're invited to the evening's entertainment, a production of Voltaire's latest play. You arrive to find Christian already in the royal box, already at it again. The actors soldier on, but Hamlet's soliloquy loses something when accompanied by royal grunting. The lead actress's eye twitches every time Christian moans, but she maintains character. The show, as they say, must go on. To be or not to be, the actor intones, while Christian answers the question with vigorous enthusiasm for being. Very enthusiastically being, between acts, you witness Christian's other charming habits. He suddenly slaps the Russian ambassador, hard, across the face, then laughs uproariously. "You look too serious," he explains. The ambassador, blood trickling from his nose, manages a diplomatic smile. Starting a war with Denmark over a mad king's assault would be admitting a madman landed the blow. Christian's physical comedy routine continues. He pulls chairs out from under elderly courtiers, throws wine in ladies' faces, and once drops his trousers entirely to show the British envoy the royal jewels. The court has developed a complex system of warnings, coded fan movements and strategic coughing, to alert newcomers when Christian is approaching. The king believes in radical honesty, explains Count Bernstorff, the long-suffering foreign minister. He says clothing is a lie, propriety is a prison, and the body's desires should never be denied. He pauses as Christian begins urinating in a potted plant. Unfortunately, he's still the king. The tragedy is that Christian has moments of clarity. Between masturbation sessions, he shows flashes of intelligence, even wit. He speaks multiple languages, understands complex philosophy, and has surprisingly progressive ideas about prison reform. Then his hand drifts to his crotch again, and Denmark's brief hope for rational governance evaporates. You attend a state banquet where Christian combines all his favorite activities. He masturbates through the soup course, slaps the visiting Swedish prince during the fish, exposes himself during the meat, and by dessert he's standing on the table, pants around his ankles, declaring himself the god of truth and nature. "At least he's not violent," whispers a courtier. Then immediately crosses himself as Christian starts throwing cutlery at guests who aren't applauding his display. "Usually not violent," he amends. The Queen appears briefly, pale and drawn, accompanied by Struensee. Christian greets her by graphically describing what he'd like to do to her sister, then returns to his tabletop performance. Caroline Mathilde's expression suggests she's calculating how much longer she has to endure this before Struensee can declare the king incompetent and take over the government. Not long, as it turns out, within months. Struensee essentially rules Denmark, while Christian is given a wing of the palace where he can masturbate, slap servants, and expose himself to his heart's content without derailing the government. It's an elegant solution. The king remains king in name while his handlers run the country and keep him supplied with lotion. But tonight, Christian is still nominally in charge, ending the banquet by challenging the French ambassador to a duel of manhood. This doesn't mean swords. It means exactly what you fear it means. The ambassador politely declines, claiming diplomatic immunity from comparative anatomy displays. As the evening ends, Christian makes his rounds, shaking hands with his right hand despite everyone knowing exactly where it's been. The receiving line moves quickly, guests barely touching the royal fingers before retreating to frantically wash their hands. You follow suit, scrubbing until your skin is raw, but the memory won't wash off. "Come back tomorrow," Christian calls out cheerfully. "We're discussing agricultural policy. It should be very stimulating." The double entendre is definitely intentional, for all his madness. Christian knows exactly what he's doing. He's turned the Danish court into his personal peep show, and everyone else is an unwilling participant. It's exhibitionism as state policy, masturbation as monarchical privilege. Later, safe in your lodgings, you learn that Christian has issued a new decree. All palace guards must wear tight trousers so he can better appreciate their figures. Denmark, progressive, enlightened Denmark, is being run by a royal pervert who makes Caligula look subtle. At least Caligula appointed his horse to the Senate. Christian would probably just molest it. You escape Copenhagen's exhibitionist monarch only to find yourself in Prague. 1609, climbing the winding stairs of Hradčany Castle. The air grows thicker with each step, heavy with sulfur and stranger scents, mercury, antimony, and something that might be boiling lead. You're entering the court of Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Bohemia, and Europe's most dedicated occultist. Forget governing an empire. Rudolf is too busy trying to turn lead into gold and summoning angels to bother with trivial matters like wars or economics. A court dwarf dressed as an alchemical symbol, literally, he's wearing a costume shaped like the sign for Mercury, leads you through corridors lined with curiosities. Two-headed calves float in jars, mechanical lions roar when you pass, and a perpetual motion machine clicks away in defiance of physics. This is the Kunstkammer, Rudolf's wonder chamber, where the emperor has collected every oddity, artwork, and magical artifact money can buy. "His Majesty is in the tower," the dwarf announces, which sounds ominous until you realize he means the powder tower, where Rudolf conducts his alchemical experiments. You climb more stairs, past rooms full of astrologers arguing about planetary positions and mathematicians trying to square the circle. The whole castle feels like a university run by madmen. You enter the laboratory to find Rudolf II, by the grace of God elected Holy Roman Emperor, wearing a leather apron covered in suspicious stains and bent over a bubbling alembic. He doesn't look up. Emperors wait for no one when they're on the verge of discovering the Philosopher's Stone. His famous Habsburg jaw juts out in concentration as he adds a pinch of powdered pearl to his mixture. "Unicorn horn," he mutters without looking at you. "That's what's been missing. But the Venetians keep sending me narwhal tusks. Do they think I can't tell the difference? The vibrational frequencies are completely different. An explosion from a nearby furnace makes everyone duck." Rudolf doesn't even flinch. "That would be Edward," he says calmly. "He's attempting to extract the soul from Cinnabar. Third explosion this week. We're making progress." The mainstream historical record paints Rudolf as a patron of the arts and sciences, which is technically true if you count trying to summon demons as science. His court attracts every mystic, magician, and charlatan in Europe. John Dee and Edward Kelly claim they can talk to angels. Rabbi Lowe insists his golem protects Prague's Jewish quarter. An Italian named Giovanni promises he can fly if Rudolf builds him wings of virgin swan feathers. Rudolf funds them all. "Your Majesty," A courtier nervously interrupts. The Turks are advancing on the eastern border. Perhaps we should discuss. The Turks! Rudolf spins around, eyes wild with excitement. Yes. Do they still have that alchemist? The one who claims to make Greek fire? Offer him double whatever they're paying. Triple. We need that formula. But sire, the defense of the realm. Is this? Rudolf gestures at his laboratory. Don't you understand? One successful transmutation and we'll have unlimited gold. Unlimited gold means unlimited armies. It's simple economics. Historians still debate whether Rudolf genuinely believed in his occult pursuits or just used them to avoid governing. Watching him carefully measure out powdered emerald while his empire crumbles, you suspect it's both. He's hiding from responsibility in a fantasy where he controls the universe through secret knowledge. You're given a tour of Rudolf's collections by Tycho Brahe, the famous astronomer with the silver nose. He lost the original in a duel over a mathematical formula. The emperor believes all knowledge is connected, Tycho explains, showing you a room full of clockwork automata. Astronomy, alchemy, art, all faces of the same cosmic truth. Also, he thinks this mechanical duck can predict the future. The duck, when wounded, waddles in circles and defecates small brass pellets. Rudolf has courtiers analyze the patterns for prophetic meaning. Last week, the duck apparently predicted rain. It was sunny for 3 days straight, but Rudolf insists the duck meant metaphorical rain, possibly a rain of gold, any day now. His Majesty has made Prague the center of the occult world. Tycho continues proudly. You pass a room where men in robes are attempting to animate a bronze head that will answer all questions. So far, it just screams when they pour mercury in its mouth. We have more magicians per capita than anywhere in Europe. This is not the boast Tycho thinks it is. Prague's legitimate merchants are fleeing the city, replaced by sellers of dragon blood, actually plant resin. Mummy powder, usually just ground up cats, and authentic pieces of the true cross. Prague apparently has enough fragments to build several crosses. The economy runs on fraud and wishful thinking. You're summoned to witness Rudolf's greatest experiment. In a chamber painted with zodiacal symbols, the emperor attempts to create the homunculus, an artificial human grown in a bottle. He's following instructions from an ancient Arabic text that he can't actually read but insists he understands spiritually. The secret is maternal impression, Rudolf explains, adding human hair to a mixture of horse dung and mercury. If we think pure thoughts while creating it, the homunculus will be born wise. He closes his eyes and presumably thinks pure thoughts while stirring toxic sludge. The assembled courtiers nod seriously. Nobody mentions that Rudolf has been trying this for 15 years, with nothing to show but several explosions and one assistant who went blind. The emperor's faith in alchemy is unshakable, possibly because the alternative, accepting he's wasted his life on nonsense, is unbearable. Perhaps, suggests his advisor, Your Majesty could take a brief break to sign these treaty documents. Rudolf waves dismissively. Have my brother do it. I'm at a crucial stage. Look, bubbles. It's gestating. His brother Matthias is slowly taking over the empire piece by piece, while Rudolf plays with his chemistry set. The Holy Roman Empire is dissolving faster than Rudolf's experiments. But the emperor only cares about dissolution in the alchemical sense. You attend an audience where Rudolf receives ambassadors while wearing robes covered in mystical symbols and a hat that supposedly channels cosmic energy. It's just a regular hat with crystals glued on. The French ambassador tries to discuss military alliances, but Rudolf, keeps interrupting to show off his collection of bees or stones, hairballs from goat stomachs that allegedly cure poison. Feel the energy, Rudolf insists, pressing a slimy stone into the ambassador's unwilling hand. 300 ducats each, but can you put a price on protection from poison? The ambassador politely notes that not being poisoned in the first place is free, but Rudolf isn't listening. He's already moved on to demonstrating his perpetual motion machine, which clearly has a servant hiding behind it with a crank. As your visit ends, you witness the arrival of a new charlatan claiming he can teach Rudolf to speak with plants. The emperor immediately gives him a palace apartment and a generous salary. Meanwhile, unpaid soldiers desert the army, and unpaid officials sell their offices to the highest bidder. The Holy Roman Empire is transmuting all right, from gold to lead, the exact opposite of Rudolf's goal. The acrid smoke of Rudolf's laboratory fades, replaced by the sterile scent of Georgian medicine, which is to say, barely any improvement at all. You're in Windsor Castle, 1789, and King George III of England is strapped to a chair while doctors torture him back to sanity. His crime? Talking too fast, pissing purple, and occasionally believing he's married to a pillow. Hold him steady, barks Dr. Francis Willis, the mad doctor hired to cure the mad king. George thrashes against leather restraints while attendants force his mouth open. You watch in horror as they pour a cocktail of substances down his throat, crushed beetles, mercury, and something Willis calls vomitory tartar. The king promptly vomits, which Willis considers progress. The poisons must be expelled. The doctor explains with the confidence of someone who has no idea what he's doing. His Majesty's humours are corrupted. We must purge them through every available orifice. And purge they do. George is subjected to a medical torture session that would make Vlad the Impaler squeamish. Blistering agents applied to his skin to draw out the madness. Ice-cold baths that leave him blue and shaking. Restraint chairs that hold him motionless for hours, while doctors lecture him about the importance of royal composure. "I am the King of England," George screams through the gag. "I demand." "You demand nothing," Willis interrupts coldly. "You are a patient. Patients obey. Kings rule. When you remember the difference, you can be king again." The mainstream historical record now suggests George suffered from porphyria, a genetic condition that causes purple urine and neurological symptoms. But in 1789, the best medical minds in England have decided the king is mad because he talks too much and needs to be tortured into silence. It's working about as well as you'd expect. You're allowed to observe a treatment session where George, wrapped in a straitjacket, is forced to stare at a portrait of himself while Willis reads improving sermons. The king's eyes dart wildly, and he mutters constantly under his breath. Something about Lady Pembroke being a horse and needing to save her from the glue factory. His Majesty's delusions centre on inappropriate attachments. Willis notes, clinically, "Yesterday he declared his love for Elizabeth Spencer, despite being married. We corrected this by showing him portraits of the Queen while applying thumbscrews. Negative reinforcement. You understand." The horrifying thing is that George's madness seems relatively mild compared to his treatment. He talks rapidly, yes. He sometimes strips naked and runs through the palace. He once tried to shake hands with a tree, thinking it was the King of Prussia. But the cure, months of torture disguised as medicine, is definitely worse than the disease. "The purple water is the key," insists another physician, Dr. Warren. He's collected dozens of samples of the royal urine, arranged by colour from violet to deep purple. If we can return His Majesty's water to proper yellow, his mind will follow. Nobody asks why urine color should affect mental state. They just keep forcing George to drink concoctions designed to alter his output. The king now spends half his time strapped to a close stool, a fancy chamber pot, while doctors eagerly examine the results like fortune tellers reading tea leaves. You witness the doctor's daily consultation, where they argue treatment while George listens from his restraint chair. More mercury, says one. Less mercury, says another. Spinning chair, suggests a third, referring to a device that rotates patients until they vomit. Definitely the spinning chair. George, gagged but not deaf, makes muffled protest that everyone ignores. Or the King of England has become a living experiment in how much torture can one man take and still function. The answer, increasingly, is not much more. I had a breakthrough yesterday, Willis announces proudly. His Majesty remained calm for 3 entire hours. Of course, he was unconscious from the laudanum, but still, progress. The treatments escalate. George is buried up to his neck in hot sand. He's forced to wear a metal helmet that delivers therapeutic shocks. He's strapped spread eagle to a board while ice water is poured over him in precise intervals calculated to shock the system into harmony. Each torture is meticulously documented in medical journals that future historians will read with horror. The Queen visits, bringing the children. George, chained to his chair like a rabid dog, tries to maintain dignity while his family stares at him with barely concealed terror. Papa is resting, the Queen tells young Princess Amelia. George rattles his chains trying to reach his daughter. Willis notes this as aggressive behavior requiring additional restraint. The tragedy, whispers a courtier, is that between episodes, he's perfectly lucid. Yesterday, he discussed agriculture policy quite brilliantly. Then he saw a purple cushion and spent 3 hours insisting it was the Archbishop of Canterbury. Historians still argue whether George's madness was real or exaggerated by doctors eager to test their theories. But watching Willis force-feed the king a mixture of brandy and ground-up Spanish flies while lecturing about moral fortitude, you realize the distinction hardly matters, sane or mad. George is trapped in a medical system that treats him like a malfunctioning machine rather than a human being. The worst session comes when Willis decides the king needs moral management. This involves strapping George to a chair and forcing him to watch as actors perform scenes of proper kingly behavior. For hours, George watches bad theatre while doctors critique his reactions. Too much emotion? Clearly mad. Too little? Suppressing madness. There's no winning. I particularly recommend the Franciscan method, says a visiting Italian doctor. He produces a club. Beat the madness out. Very effective in Rome. Willis actually considers it before deciding it might leave visible bruises. They settle for pressure points instead. Essentially torture that doesn't leave marks. As months pass, George learns to perform sanity. He speaks slowly and carefully. He avoids topics that excite him. He pretends his urine is yellow even when it's purple as wine. He's not cured, he's broken, trained like a circus animal to act normal enough that doctors will stop torturing him. His Majesty shows remarkable improvement. Willis declares after George manages a week without mentioning Lady Pembroke, or trying to play his pillow like a violin. We've purged the madness through systematic treatment. What they've really done is terrorize a sick man into hiding his symptoms. George is released back to his throne, where he'll rule for decades more, always knowing that one purple piss or rapid speech could land him back in Willis's tender care. It's enough to drive anyone mad. The final irony comes when Willis publishes his account of curing the king. launching a revolution in mental health treatment. Across Europe, asylums adopt his methods. Restraint, intimidation, and medical torture become the standard of care for the mentally ill. George's suffering becomes a template for thousands more. You leave Windsor as George is declared cured and return to power. He seems shaky but determined, issuing proclamations with careful deliberation. Only his eyes betray the truth. They dart constantly to the doctors, checking if he's performing sanity correctly. The King of England has learned to act like a king, even if he occasionally still believes he's married to upholstery. You escape the medical horrors of Georgian England only to land in something far more surreal. Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. In the year 2004. The entire city glitters with gold, not metaphorically, but literally. Every building, statue, and street sign is either covered in gold leaf or carved from white marble. It looks like Las Vegas designed by a dictator with unlimited funds and zero taste, which is exactly what it is. You're here to witness Sapar Murat Niyazov, who calls himself Turkmenbashi, leader of all Turkmen, and who makes even the maddest kings of history look restrained. This is a man who renamed the month of January after his mother, renamed bread after his mother, and built a 40-foot rotating golden statue of himself that always faces the sun. Because if you're going to have a personality cult, why be subtle about it? A government minder escorts you through the capital, which feels like walking through someone's fever dream. Every few blocks, there's another golden statue of Turkmenbashi, Turkmenbashi reading, Turkmenbashi thinking, Turkmenbashi ascending to heaven accompanied by his mother, who gets her own golden statues too, because apparently megalomania is hereditary. Behold the Arch of Neutrality, your guide announces proudly. It's a 250-foot tower, topped with that famous rotating golden Turkmenbashi. The statue cost $12 million in a country where most people live on less than $2 a day. It ensures the leader's golden light always shines upon his people. You ask about the logic of a rotating statue. The guide's smile becomes fixed. The leader's wisdom transcends ordinary logic. Please, no more questions about the statue. The mainstream historical record treats Niyazov as just another eccentric dictator. But being here, seeing it firsthand, you realize this goes beyond eccentricity into a kind of performance art of insanity. He's renamed everything, months, days of the week, common objects. April is now Mother, guess whose? The month of September is Runama. After the book, Niyazov wrote that he's made mandatory reading for everyone, for everything. To obtain a driver's license, your guide explains, you must pass a test on the Runama, also for university admission, also for job applications, also for marriage licenses. The book, a rambling mixture of autobiography, poetry, and made-up history, has replaced every other text in schools. Math problems use examples from the Runama. Science classes study the Runama. Literature class is just reading the Runama over and over. You visit a hospital that Niyazov recently reformed. He's fired all the nurses and replaced them with military conscripts because anyone can be a nurse. He's also closed all hospitals outside the capital because, according to him, if people are sick, they can come to Ashgabat. The fact that Turkmenistan is mostly desert and some sick people live hundreds of miles away doesn't seem to factor into his reasoning. The leader has also banned gold teeth and gold dental caps, your guide adds. He considers them unaesthetic. Everyone must replace them with white teeth. You point out that many people can't afford dental work. Then they should take better care of their teeth, the guide says. echoing Turkmenbashi's own words. The leader recommends chewing bones, like dogs do. Dogs have excellent teeth. The surreal tour continues to the National Museum, which is basically a shrine to Turkmenbashi and his mother. You learn that she died in an earthquake when he was young, which explains the obsession, but not the part where he's renamed half the country after her. There's an entire wing dedicated to her favorite recipes. Another wing holds Turkmenbashi's gifts to himself: golden swords, jewel-encrusted portraits, a cape made of exotic bird feathers that he wears during national addresses. Is that a meteorite, you ask, pointing to a large rock in a glass case. The leader's personal meteorite, the guide confirms. He believes it gives him cosmic energy. He meditates with it every morning. Historians still argue about whether Nyazov believes his own mythology or just uses it for control. But watching a video of him explaining that the Turkmen people descended from Noah's Ark via a wolf that mated with a princess. This is in children's textbooks now. You think he's crossed the line from strategic madness to genuine delusion. You attend a session of the Halk Maslahati, People's Council, which is less a governing body and more a praise circle for Turkmenbashi. Ministers compete to compliment the leader more extravagantly. One praises his sunrise wisdom. Another thanks him for breathing life into the nation. A third actually credits him with improving the weather. Turkmenbashi sits on a throne. Yes, an actual golden throne, nodding approvingly. Then he announces his latest decree. He's banning opera, ballet, and circus because they're not part of Turkmen culture. Also banned, smoking, reasonable, recorded music, less reasonable, and makeup on television presenters. What? He's already banned chewing tobacco, but only for women, because it makes them unattractive. I have also decided to ban gold-plated statues, he announces, and the council holds its breath. From now on, all statues of me must be solid gold. Plating is deceptive. The people deserve authentic gold. The council erupts in applause. Nobody points out that the country's hospitals lack basic medications, while he's demanding solid gold monuments to himself. The finance minister is quietly weeping, probably calculating how many teachers' salaries each statue costs. The real madness becomes clear when you visit a rural area outside the capital. Here, in villages without running water or electricity, golden statues of Turkmenbashi still gleam in the desert sun. Children study the Runama by candlelight in schools with no roofs. Doctors work without antibiotics in clinics decorated with the leader's portrait. It's like Louis XIV's Versailles, but at least Louis kept his madness contained to one palace. Turkmenbashi has made an entire nation his monument to megalomania. The leader has graciously decreed a national holiday, your guide announces as you return to Ashgabat. Melon Day, celebrating Turkmenistan's melons. There will be concerts, parades, and competitive melon eating. You attend Melon Day because at this point, why not? Thousands gather to watch Turkmenbashi judge melons while delivering a speech about how Turkmen melons are superior to all other melons, just as Turkmen people are superior to all other people, just as he is superior to all other leaders. The logical circle is so perfect it's almost beautiful. The celebration culminates with Turkmenbashi presenting a golden melon, of course, to himself, of course, while the national anthem plays, renamed the Song of Turkmenbashi, of course. Fireworks spell out his name in the sky. Children dressed as melons dance around a giant rotating statue of, you guessed it, Turkmenbashi holding a melon. As you prepare to leave this golden madhouse, you pass one final monument, a massive golden book, pages perpetually turning via hidden motors. It's the Runama, of course, mechanically reading itself for eternity. The inscription says it will continue turning until the end of time, spreading Turkmenbashi's wisdom to future generations. The guide notices your expression. Beautiful, isn't it? The leader says that after death, anyone who reads the Runama 3 times will go directly to heaven. You wonder what heaven looks like in Turkmenbashi's imagination. Probably a lot like Ashgabat, golden, surreal, and completely detached from reality. A place where his mother's name is every month and his face is the sun. Actually, that sounds more like hell, but you keep that thought to yourself. In Turkmenistan, even thinking critically about melons can get you in trouble. You leave Turkmenbashi's golden dystopia and find yourself back where this journey through royal madness began. Not in place, but in theme. You're standing in a modern psychiatric hospital in London. 2010, reading case files that trace the DNA of madness through royal bloodlines. The names are different. The treatment's more humane, but the patterns remain. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And sometimes it just drives you completely insane. The psychiatrist showing you around doesn't name names. Patient confidentiality extends even to deceased royalty, but the implications are clear. We've treated descendants of many of the rulers you've learned about. She says carefully, the genetic components of certain conditions, they persist. You think about the Habsburgs with their infamous jaw, generations of inbreeding producing Charles II of Spain, so deformed he couldn't chew, so mentally impaired he couldn't rule, the Romanovs with their haemophilia, the British royals with their porphyria, madness and monarchy intertwined like DNA strands, each generation passing down not just crowns but compulsions. What's fascinating, the doctor continues, is how power amplifies existing conditions. A regular person with narcissistic personality disorder might alienate friends. A king with the same condition builds golden statues of himself and renames the calendar. She shows you brain scans from a recent study, anonymized, but the context is clear. These are scans of people with inherited titles, inherited wealth, inherited power. The areas associated with empathy show decreased activity. The regions linked to impulse control are underdeveloped. It's as if privilege itself rewires the brain, creating a neurological foundation for the very behaviors you've witnessed. We call it acquired situational narcissism, she explains. When everyone always says yes to you, when your every whim is indulged, when you're told from birth that you're chosen by God to rule, how could you develop normally? How could you not go a little mad? You remember Caligula, raised in terror and emerging as a terrorist. Ibrahim the Mad, locked in a cage and learning that the only power he had was the power to destroy. Ludwig II, so isolated by protocol that swans became his closest companions. These weren't just bad people making bad choices. They were broken people in broken systems. Their madness as much a product of their positions as their personalities. The real tragedy, the doctor says, showing you a medieval illustration of the divine right of kings, is that their subjects suffered most. When you believe God appointed you to rule, your mental illness becomes God's will, your delusions become law, your paranoia becomes purges. The numbers are staggering. Vlad impaled 80,000. The Aztec emperors sacrificed hundreds of thousands. Stalin, that secular czar, killed millions. The mad kings of history left mountains of corpses, each death justified by the killer's conviction that they were special, chosen, above the normal rules of human behavior. But here's what really haunts me. The doctor confesses. We've identified the genes. We understand the environmental factors. We know how to prevent this kind of madness. Yet we still create systems that concentrate power, still worship wealth, still enable narcissists to rise. It's as if we're addicted to creating mad kings. You think about modern autocrats building golden palaces while their people starve, CEOs earning thousands of times their workers' wages and losing touch with human reality. Tech billionaires convinced they can solve problems they don't understand. The mad kings aren't gone. They've just traded crowns for other symbols of power. There was a study, the doctor mentions, pulling up data on her computer. They had people play Monopoly, but some players started with twice as much money. By the end, the advantaged players genuinely believed they'd earned their victory through skill. They literally couldn't see their unfair advantage. Now imagine that mindset, but with real money, real power, real consequences. Historians still argue about which kings were truly mad versus merely eccentric. But watching the doctor explain how power changes brain chemistry, how isolation breeds paranoia, how absolute authority absolutely corrupts cognitive function, you realize the distinction misses the point. The madness wasn't the bug, it was the feature. A system that puts one person above all others will inevitably produce monsters. What's the solution, you ask? She laughs, but it's bitter. Democracy helps, accountability helps, but mostly, understanding that anyone, given enough power for enough time, will go a little mad. The only real safeguard is making sure no one person ever has that much power again. You leave the hospital and walk through London, past Buckingham Palace, where tourists snap photos of guards who can't move, can't speak, can't be human while on duty. The symbolic remnants of absolute monarchy, neutered and made safe for public consumption. The current royals cut ribbons and champion charities. Their power ceremonial, their madness limited to ordinary human dysfunction. But elsewhere in the world, new mad kings rise. They build towers with their names in gold letters. They poison their enemies and claim it's suicide. They rename cities after themselves and demand applause for their genius. The technology changes, the justifications evolve, but the fundamental madness remains, the delusion that one person matters more than everyone else. You think about Henry VIII, consuming 6 wives and an entire church to feed his appetites, about Peter the Great, drowning Russia in vodka to avoid facing his failures, about every ruler who chose their own glory over their people's welfare. They're all the same story, really. What happens when human frailty meets inhuman power? The sun sets over London, and somewhere in the city, a billionaire is buying another yacht while homeless people sleep in doorways. Somewhere, a politician is gerrymandering districts to ensure they never lose power. Somewhere, a CEO is deciding that quarterly profits matter more than human lives. The mad kings never left. They just got better at hiding their madness. But you also think about the servants who quietly returned Farouk's stolen goods, the courtiers who kept Denmark running while Christian VII masturbated through state meetings, the people who always find ways to survive and subvert their mad rulers. Maybe that's the real lesson of history. Not that power makes people mad, but that ordinary people always find ways to endure and eventually overcome that madness. As you walk away from the palace, you pass a street performer dressed as Henry VIII, posing for photos with tourists. He's cheerful, rotund, harmless, history's monster reduced to entertainment. A small child asks him, "Were you really so mean to your wives?" The performer stays in character, only when they deserved it. The crowd laughs. The child looks unconvinced. Smart kid. She's already learned the most important lesson. Never trust anyone who thinks they deserve absolute power. They're all mad. Every single one of them. The only difference is how many people they take down with them when they fall. The street lamps flicker on one by one, casting gentle pools of amber light across the London pavements. Your journey through time is ending now, and the city around you feels impossibly peaceful after all you've witnessed. No golden statues demanding worship. No screams from torture chambers. No drunken czars or masturbating kings. Just ordinary people heading home from ordinary days, blissfully free from the whims of absolute rulers. You find a bench in a small park and sit for a moment, letting the weight of history settle around you like a comfortable blanket. The mad kings are all dead now. Caligula and Nero, Ibrahim and Vlad, all of them return to dust. Their palaces are museums. Their torture chambers are tourist attractions. Their golden monuments sold off or melted down. Time, that great democratic force, eventually humbles even the maddest king. A gentle breeze carries the scent of night-blooming jasmine, soft and sweet after so much remembered horror. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour, not frantically, like Charles VI feared, but with measured, calming notes. The sound reminds you that most of human history isn't mad kings and their cruelties. It's ordinary people living ordinary lives, loving their families, tending their gardens, finding small joys despite whoever happens to wear the crown. Your eyelids grow heavy as the city settles into its nighttime rhythm. The mad kings feel very far away now, like characters from a half-remembered nightmare. Perhaps that's what they always were. Temporary aberrations in the longer story of human kindness and resilience. Let them fade now. All those terrible rulers with their terrible appetites. Let them become nothing more than cautionary tales whispered in the dark. You're safe here in the present, where power is checked and balanced, where madness is treated instead of crowned. Close your eyes, breathe deeply. Let history's horrors dissolve into harmless stories, dark fairy tales that have lost their power to harm. Tomorrow the sun will rise on a world without divine rights or absolute rulers. Tonight, you can finally rest. Sweet dreams.